folks, and welcome to program 61 of the AMMACH Files. It's the 15th of December 2015, and as you know, I think we're just a spot after 11 o'clock. Isn't that amazing over here? Anyway, and we are on peoplesinternetradio.com. Now, my guest this evening is an extraordinary lady. She is not only an experiencer, but a researcher of many years' renown, setting up her own research site, and we'll talk all about that when we hook up with her all the way from New Zealand after a few comments about things AMMACH. So the things I wanted to talk about just briefly were the different sort of bad rap that we talked about, the reptilians and then the greys. And this has come about again because there's various people who have really negative experiences with greys, and they report those, and it's a real trauma, real difficulty. And it seems that ultimately, whichever way the mop flops, the outcome of all of these experiences is the evolution of consciousness, whether we like it or not. And the other thing is those who have the most incredible positive experiences. And so when people are very young in their experiences, as one or two people I've been speaking to are, and they have very positive experiences with the greys, and then they connect with others who really have a very difficult time with them, and maybe their lifelong experiences, it causes a lot of confusion. So there is a lot going on to discuss this, and one of the things we're going to talk to Suzanne Hansen about is her book called The Dual Soul Connection, The Alien Agenda for Human Advancement. So we've got a real big show for you this evening. So one of the things I also wanted to flag up, and excuse me, this is, we've got kind of a bit of a last minute bit in here, but I did want to say that whilst I've been organising the AMMACH get together for this Saturday, which is the 19th from 1:30 till 5:30, if anybody wants to come along, let me know, send me an email. We've got James Bartley sharing an hour with us with Q&As later. But in talking to one of the two people who are coming, they said, oh, we were just looking at some material from Miles Johnston again. And as you know, he was my ex-colleague. And they said, you know, he's saying that you're in the pay of MI6. I said, oh, really? How interesting. Well, all I can say to you folks is I'm not. And if I was, I would definitely want a pay rise, because zero cash in the bank from MI6 is not on. So there we go. But, you know, this, I have to say, it may seem harmless, and it is harmless in a way, but it is just another way that people muddy the waters and bring this field into disrepute. I mean, the kind of nonsense like this is just, just another layer that we have to peel back. And unfortunately, there's very many people who are not so aware of the other layers that go to make up where that nonsense came from, and it's just malicious muddying. So I am not in the pay, this is on the record, of MI6, and at least not that I'm aware. Maybe in another dimension, but not in this. So one of the things I wanted to do today as well is flag up once again the seriousness of what we're doing, of this exposure, of this disclosure. And one of the icons of this movement in the radio world is Art Bell. And many of you will have heard of Art Bell on the famous Coast to Coast radio station, from which he hung up his hat in about 2007, and then recently. So we're going to talk with Steve Roberts just for a few moments before we bring on Suzanne, just to talk about this. And we've got a clip of a trailer of Art Bell, which was just done this year, I think. So we'll play that just so you can hear the iconic dulcet tones. Hi, folks. I think I'm back with you. I'm hearing myself back.
You are back.
So how's that sound going, folks? Because I'm getting a bit of reverb there. Is it okay for everybody? Does that sound all right, Steve?
Yes, it's fine here.
Okay, great. So, folks, that was a Crystal Gale singing Midnight in the Desert, and we'll hear a little bit more of that just before we bring Suzy on. And I just wanted to flag up some of the thoughts and the reasons why Art Bell is giving up for the final time, so he says. So, there's an article that she wrote called Art Hangs It Up for the Last Time, and I'm just going to read from that. So, he says, and the interesting thing is, just before I read that, I was on the sister program to the Dark Matter Radio last Wednesday, doing an interview with PSN, and thanks everybody for that. And they were just saying as the interview was finishing, oh, great, and now we've got Art Bell. And then, oh, there was a bit of a moment, and no, we don't have Art Bell. So that was around the time 9th, 11th, 9th and 10th last week that this relates to. So it says, I'm sorry to have to announce that this will be that I won't be on tonight or any other night, as I'm going to hang it up. Whoever this crazy person is, now, Art has been stalked by a gunman for quite a while. So he and his family have been living in really difficult circumstances whilst he's been trying to get his work done and out there. So whoever this crazy person is, they are not stopping. And it has come to the point that we as a family do not feel it's worth the risk. While I think the person or persons who are after me, my wife and now my daughter, are really scared. And the other night, after the latest incident, my daughter was off in the corner of her bed, scared to death, as the police cars came screaming up. His daughter's only about 4 or 5 years old at the moment. I will not put my family through this. And as you know, I dearly love what I do, but not at the expense of never-ending terrorism. I want to thank those of you who have shown so much support, and it has been my joy, short as it has been, to have cracked that mic open for the last time. This was a family decision. The girls stuck with me and still would be, but if one of them were harmed because of what I love doing, my life would be over. So, Steve, I just wanted to bring you on because we were discussing this earlier, and we were just talking about how long Art Bell has been on the airwaves.
Yes, I'm here. I believe the wiki link I seen earlier said that Art started well back into the late 60s, but actually him and his partner at the time, and I forget his name now. I thought you might have had that. I give it to you, but they started Coast to Coast back in 1988.
Oh, yeah, so it's with Alan Corpeth. Yes, 1988. Yeah, indeed. Yeah, that's amazing. And it really is astonishing because whilst he I think he gave up Coast to Coast in 1998, and then continued with Dark Matter Radio, and did a fantastic job until once again he hung up his mic, if you like, in 2000, and I think it was 7, and he's had to endure an awful lot of death threats. I mean, there was a moment, I think only just this last October, when his wife called the county sheriff of Nye and just said, my husband called me, he was on the property, he called me, and now I can't get hold of him. And they found him on the ground, and he wasn't injured, but there'd been a couple of what he thought were gunshots ringing out. So he's been fired at. And, you know, what's very sad about this, and also interesting to note, is that this subject seems to be higher than politics, because it seems that George Noory, a host also of Coast to Coast, was really veering off into a different track than Art Bell wanted to go down, namely over to the political side. So, and Art Bell came back only earlier this year, well, I think only about 6 months ago even, to start back on the radio. And it has been, you know, this short few months that he has been terrorized out of and terrified of going on the radio. So, folks, the reason I'm just flagging this up again, and Steve, I don't know whether you've got any more comments to add about that. He's certainly been a massive icon in getting this information out there over the years. And I, for one, just want to say thank you very much, Art Bell and Coast to Coast team and Dark Matters. Just to say it's been an amazing amazing to hear.
Yeah, well,
All the
that was.
information.
I'm sorry, there was just one more short comment. I haven't been able to substantiate it, but there was a rumor or an allegation back about almost 2 years ago now that Coast to Coast had taken some funding from a South American drug cartel, and I don't recall which one had been named, but I don't know. That was just an allegation, and also the turn of the turn to a different direction, as the one link I said Art Bell didn't really like that. Maybe the management was going is the reason why he left in the first time.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. So he's brought us some really, great breaking news, cutting edge material over the years. And, again, without these people, step by step, probably I wouldn't be here. I cut my teeth on a lot of the coast to coast material. And I'm sure maybe perhaps a lot of people in this field did. Anyway, it's with great sadness that we say goodbye to Art Bell from my side. Anyway, whatever anybody else thinks of his style or kind, he really was a fantastic host. So just to say to Art Bell, bless you and wish you and your family well. So thanks for that, Stephen. We're going to perhaps, if you can, just play the rest of the Crystal Gale number that we were playing before we bring Suzanne on, who's been waiting patiently for us in the wings. And that is, Crystal Gale was one of his first guests, I think, as I might have already said that. So it just is nice that we just honor Art and all his work with that little note. But it is difficult sometimes. So anyway, we'll listen to Crystal Gale once more, if we can, there, Stephen. And then we'll come back with Suzanne Hansen, all the way over in New Zealand. Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, I'll take that applause and give it to Art Bell. Suzanne Hansen. Suzy, welcome to the AMMACH Files. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you. Lovely to be here to talk to you.
Absolutely wonderful. And Suzanne, what's really fascinating is that your book, which I think was, I don't know when it was out, Suzanne, you'll have to excuse me, I didn't check on that date, but it is written with Dr. Rudy Shield, who is an astrophysicist. And that is really astonishing. So perhaps you can tell us a little bit about the background of your story and then how you come to get Dr. Rudy Shield involved. And he also is involved with FREE, isn't he? The, what's FREE? It's the Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial Encounters. So thank you, Suzanne.
Okay. Well, the first part of your question is that I started writing my book and I really wrote it about 3 times. That's why it took so long to get it done. But each time I tried to concentrate on something different and decide which way I was going to do it. And it just, in my mind, didn't seem to be hanging together. And for many years now, I've been wanting science to become involved in this field a lot more. I know that there's a lot of scientists who are interested in the field, but can't step out of their professional box for in case of ramifications. However, I decided that I would like to have someone involved in a book to just look at my material and give me their perspective on it, particularly the scientific kind of information that I was talking about. And I'm no scientist myself, so I felt that I was talking about things that maybe had a scientific basis, but I wasn't expressing it adequately. I had seen a DVD of Rudy speaking at a conference, and as soon as I saw that DVD, I felt as if I knew him already, which was quite an extraordinary feeling. It took me some time before I was able to get his contact details and get in touch with him. I asked him if he would have a look at some of my material, and he said, yes, send me 2 or 3 chapters and I'll have a look. So I did. It was still in manuscript form. And he came back and said, well, look, I can explain this in terms of physics and astrophysics. Here's what I think of what you've written here. And he had a look at a few more chapters and said, how about I help you to understand the science that you're actually writing about, because you clearly don't understand it from a scientific perspective, and I can help you to understand it in a way that you'll be able to write it. So send me some more chapters, and I sent him some of the ones that I thought possibly he might balk at, because even to me they seemed quite out there. And in fact, those were the ones that he actually aligned with and associated with the most, which was very surprising. And at that point, he said to me, I'd actually like to become part of the book, and I'm offering to contribute footnotes, commentary, and scientist's epilogue. So we worked over a period of 3 years on the information, as and when we were both able to do so, because we have other lives as well. And the result was the book, which documents my life as a person who's experienced contact since pre-birth. I'd like to make that point, from the soul state into incarnating into this life and up to today.
That's wonderful. And I was really hoping to get Dr. Shield on the show, but I hear he was still a little bit nervous about making that kind of a public kind of link. But who knows? Maybe next year.
Well, we have done some interviews together, but at present he's working on some quite detailed scientific material, and he has limited time.
Yes, absolutely. So, Suzanne, I want to talk about the dual soul nature, but before we do that, I don't want to jump off that board too fast. If we can just go back to, I know you'll have done this before many times, but just talk about the beginnings for you of your whole experience, and also of your families, because I don't mean your current family now, I mean your parents, and what their experience was with you.
Okay, well, I generally tend to leave my family out of this, although I have made reference in my book to that. I have to respect, other people's privacy. However, from early childhood, I did have memories and dreamlike memories that occurred that were unlike anything that one would expect a child to be dreaming about. Of course, it wasn't until later on in life that I actually began to analyze that. But also I used to wake at night and see what I referred to as golden beings by my bed. So these were the 3 silhouettes that were just light. I didn't see facial features or clothing or anything like that, just 3 golden figures that would communicate with me.
Sorry, Susan, just to interrupt there. I think we've got those glowing figures. If we can pull those up whilst you're speaking about them, that would be great. So, because it's really very graphic, the drawing. And when I say graphic, what I mean is it really gives you the sense of what was happening there. So perhaps you can let me know when that's up there, Stephen. But anyway, sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to let people see that too.
Okay, so these golden beings would appear by my bed and speak to me telepathically, although in those days I didn't know the word telepathy. It was just that my mouth didn't move, and I couldn't see any facial features on them, but I was getting messages and I was conveying messages, and it seemed to be quite natural. They would say to me they were taking me somewhere, I was helping them in some way, and then I would not remember any more until either I woke the next morning or I found myself back in bed saying goodbye to them. So there was always that slice in the middle. If you want to call it missing time, you can, but I couldn't remember what had taken place. But I would have these dreams that where I was in strange environments, unlike anything that I had ever seen in the 50s and 60s in childhood in New Zealand. So we're talking about very stark rooms with unusual equipment and unusual technology that I had no knowledge of. Then in my 20s, well, actually when I was 20, I had a real catalyst kind of an experience, which was quite terrifying, but really intriguing at the same time, that also involved missing time. I was travelling with a friend on a lonely country road in New Zealand, and we saw some lights appear over hills ahead of us. Then they just kind of disappeared as if they'd clicked off. And we argued a bit bantered about what that was. Was it a helicopter? Was it an agricultural aircraft coming into land on a farm? Had the aircraft turned away and that's why the lights disappeared? But then they appeared right over the hill next to us, and that really created a ruckus in the car because that was quite shocking. And my flatmate and friend who was driving said, well, it's a helicopter. And of course, your logical mind clicks in and you say, well, how can it move that fast? It clicked off again and reappeared further down the hills. At that point, we started to feel quite frightened and threatened, vulnerable, because we're in a very remote area. And it disappeared, so that was fine. We didn't see them click on anywhere else, so we started to relax. And by this time, we'd come to a stop at the beginning of a very long straight, about 2.5 kilometres long, that went over a riverbed. Then my flatmate said, "Oh God, whatever it is, it's coming up behind us." And I stuck my head out the window and looked behind, and there was a massive ball of bright white light, wider than the road, maybe 30 to 50 feet in the air. And within a split second, it had engulfed the car. The light was blindingly bright. The noise was like an intense buzzing that seemed to go through your brain, your body, the car, everything. And we must have both lost consciousness, because the next thing I remember is the feeling of the car floating, hitting the road, lights coming on. It was pitch black, whereas my last memory was of late afternoon sunshine travelling over the farmland, and we'd lost time. So by the time we got back to our flat in the city, we'd lost an hour and a half. We were very thirsty, we felt sick, we were shaken, and we had absolutely no explanation for what had happened to us. And this was in 1975 New Zealand, and completely unheard of. I'd never heard of anything like that happening to people. I'd never at that stage heard the term missing time. And that really was a catalyst experience that pushed me into UFO research. And I began not only documenting sightings that I heard about, but also talking eventually in the later 70s to people who'd had similar experiences, and the early reports in New Zealand of people experiencing contact with what we now know as the Greys. I can't hear you.
Was that your very first conscious realization that something was different? Did it bring all the other memories to the fore, or was it alone in itself, standalone memory, and then others came? How did that happen for you?
Well, it was such a phenomenally frightening and unusual thing that happened. It was like completely dealing with the unknown. And so for a while, it was a standalone incident in my mind, in that it had this unpleasantness about it, which I didn't understand. And I believe the unpleasantness stemmed from the fact I didn't understand. And I think that it wasn't until maybe 2 or 3 years later, in the later 70s, when I again had similar incidents happen to me, that I began to piece things together, and I began to question what had happened to me in my childhood, those childhood memories, and try to rationalize how one felt so wonderful and one was somewhat frightening and unusual. And so there was this long period of examination through my 20s and 30s that took place into the time when I had my own children, and I began also having memories and flashbacks of being on board a craft and actually having my children there. And that's really when the panic set in for a while of, am I safe and are they safe? Because once you have children, this introduces a whole new dimension to what you're struggling with personally. It becomes a collective struggle now, and it took some time before I realized that my fears were actually unfounded, and a number of incidents occurred which actually made me realize that whatever these entities were, they were actually working with me in a positive way. But it did take quite a few years to go through that assimilation process and research and talk to other people and come to an understanding.
Was there a defining moment then for you, Suzy, about, you know, that was it like a penny dropping or an epiphany moment, or was it a gradual assimilation? Was there something, some piece of information that they finally said? What was it they showed you, or what was it they shared that made you really anchor the understanding that this was, you know, a positive thing that you'd agreed to, I imagine?
Well, there were two things that happened that really made me sit up and take notice. The first was that in the small coastal harbour community I was living in when my children were little, A friend of mine rang me up one day, and this was exactly 1 week after I had memory of a specific contact. And I had memory of being floated with one of my sons down a short road and across water and into a craft. Now, that memory was stuck in my mind, and you go through this process of, did I imagine it? Was it just a dream? And at that point in time, the way that I was thinking, I relegated it to, well, it must have just been a dream. But a week later, a friend of mine rang and said, have you been down to the harbour, Susie? I think your mates have been here. Because this is one of the very few people that I'd actually confided in about my experiences. And I said, well, what are you talking about? And I described this in the book, actually. And she said, there's 3 circles in the mud at low tide. You can see these 3 circles, they're spaced equally apart. She gave me the rough measurements, and she said that a lot of the community had been down there chipping away at them, trying to work out what they were, how they'd occurred. They were about 1.5 meters in diameter. They were like a raised dome that had baked hard in the harbour mud. They couldn't chip it or break it or affect it in any way. And when I thought about this, it was, you know, it was one of those moments where your stomach drops on the floor, because you have this realization that the position that this had occurred near the harbour was just off a very short road. It was off a boat ramp out in the harbour in the mud, and it brought back that memory I'd had of contact the week before, which I'd relegated to a dream, where I was floated down a short road and across water into a craft. And this to me seemed like absolute concrete proof that what I had recalled was in fact fact. And not long after that, I had another experience where I woke up in the morning and I remembered standing in the hallway with one of my children and breaking out of the sort of kind of relaxed, altered state that they sometimes put you in for ease of transportation, etc. And realizing that my youngest son was going to be left behind, realizing I was going somewhere and my son was still in his bed asleep. And I began communicating with the 3 entities that were there and expressing my concerns about that and saying, I'm not going with you. And at that point, they communicated with each other, and they realized that I was actually tuning into what they were saying, was comprehending what they were saying, and what they said was, okay, she's conscious, she's with it, it's time for her now to have more memory of what's going on, basically. And from that point, I did begin to have much clearer and more in-depth and extensive memory of my contact experiences. So those 2 incidents were real catalysts to coming to a clearer understanding.
Yeah, I think also one of those, I'm just thinking about maybe going through, if we talk about your book, because that's such a great lever into the whole story. If we can just put up the cover of Suzanne's book there, people can have a look at that, the dual soul connection and the alien agenda for human advancement. It sounds so fantastic, and really what we need in terms of moving the concepts and the whole thing forward, so we can be much more interactive and conscious about it, and that's really exciting. And I don't know whether this is the right time just to talk about also, I'm looking at your picture that I've got in front of me of the blue ball, Suzy with the blue ball, which is in your book. And I might just say that the drawings are actually done by your husband, Thomas Hansen, who spends quite a prodigious amount of time with you, relaying the details and him being able to draw these out. So some really wonderful, fine drawings. So wonderful that he's able to do that. So maybe let's have a look at the Suzy and the blue ball image, and maybe you could take us through that, Suzy, because that was when you were a wee little girl
That's right.
that you had that Lincoln image.
Yes, I was 8 years old on a craft, and I was in what I call a playroom, which was a large space, a large room in which a lot of children played together, and I was always a part of that on many of the visits on the craft, where there were other human children, but there were also grey children and mixed species, so that they all had slightly different physical characteristics. On this occasion, I was approached by what I call a senior grey, who asked me if I'd like to meet another child and make a new friend. And I said, yes, that would be nice, that'd be fine. So I followed him down a hallway and was taken into quite a small room that was completely empty. And I was told we were to wait just for a little while. Eventually, two greys came into the room, and between them they had, floating in the air, roughly between their heads, was a large blue, sparkling, electric-looking, luminous ball of light, and about the size of a small soccer ball. I was a little disappointed because I'd been expecting a child that I could play with, and instead in came this ball of light. At this point, the grey made quite a profound statement to it, and then he very quickly followed that up, because the moment he made the statement to me, surprise, perhaps a little bit of shock or misunderstanding set in, and he immediately calmed that and informed that. And I'll explain that to you. So first of all, he said, we want to introduce you to this. This is a soul, and this is the soul of your future son. This ball of light one day will be born in a body. You will grow up, you'll get married, you'll have children. And one of the children will carry this soul. And this soul is with us in the meantime, because we have work to do with it. We're going to be educating it and informing it, working with it. But one day it will be born, it will become your son. So we're introducing you to the soul of your future son. That was completely a blow-away kind of statement to an 8-year-old kid. And I can remember crying and being curious and a bit upset and a bit put out all at the same time. At this point, he sent what I call 3 telepathic streams to me. The first one was simply reaffirming, this is going to be a child one day and it'll be yours, it'll be your son. The second stream was a huge amount of information put into my mind, a lot of which I could recall and understand, a lot of which I couldn't, so it just drifted off into the subconscious. But it was a huge amount of information which I have put in the book of what this child would do, what my task would be, how I would have to support this human being, what they would do in life and why, and what would happen in the future and why. And all of that just went into the mind. And then at that point, there was this little calming blanket he then sent out to me as an 8-year-old child, a calming little blanket that just kind of shifted all of that out of my conscious memory and replaced it with, well, here's this friend, they're a little ball of light and you can play with them. You're going to meet up with them and play with this ball of light every time you come here, and we're going to leave the room now and we're going to let you get to know each other. You can have a play for a while. And off they went. So no interaction took place for quite a few seconds, and I was disappointed. I asked it if it would bounce. I asked it if it would do different things from a child's perspective, and it didn't. So I sat down and felt a bit disappointed and bored by it all. And at that point, that's when it actually began to communicate with me telepathically, as the greys do and did then. So at that point I realized that I could actually communicate with this. It could actually be a friend. It was something I could play with, and it was intelligent and it could talk to me. So we played, raced around the room as a kid would do, trying to catch it and all that sort of thing. And then I felt this approaching energy, if I can put it that way, an approaching seriousness, which I identified as the greys coming back, and into the room they came, reassured me again, reaffirmed that this would be my son, and said, that's great, this is going to work, you've communicated and you've got on fine, we're happy with that. So obviously they'd been observing it from afar or from somewhere else, and were happy with the result of the meeting. And obviously it was very important that we got on, otherwise plan B might have had to come into action, whatever that might have been. So that was me meeting the soul of my future son, and that was the first of many meetings on board the craft.
And how did you feel about that communication as you sort of remember back? You know, and of course you have your son now, and you know, it's these many years on. Was there an immediate recognition when he was born, or as he's grown?
Well, I had the mixed feelings of feeling when I saw the ball come into the room of disappointment that it wasn't actually a physical child, but at the same time feelings of immense love and immense knowing, as if somehow or other I already knew this soul. So there was a huge amount of confusion going on, trying to understand all of these emotions and feelings that were going around inside my head and my body at the same time.
It's really, you know, really, I mean, I don't know, I was going to say a gifting. It's also a gifting, but an incredible sort of sense of responsibility, I imagine, because you had also then explained to you what your role would be, what his role would be. And I don't know if you want to share any of that, or you want to go perhaps and talk a bit more about the book and the progression through that. I'll leave that with you, Suzanne, because there's so much to say.
Yes, well, I think that it needs to be seen in this blue ball of light, and which is quite central to the book. And the whole mission, if you want to put it that way, although it's not a word I like to use, it's kind of hackneyed, but the tasks that we have to do in life, and me being able to look back at my life, look back at my son's life and see how that is actually coming into fruition, and not through any forcing on our part, not through any planning or constructing on our part, but just the way things have dropped in front of us at the right time. Something comes along, it moves you along the path a little bit further, and then you find the next bit unfolds. So it has very much been an unfolding process that I can look back on, and that I can actually look forward into what's happening now in the world and see how these things are taking place, and how what we have to do as part of a very much bigger program that I describe in my book in detail, that millions of people are involved in. And there's so many people today saying, I feel like there's something I have to do, but I don't know what it is. And I'm sure there's a lot of listeners who will identify with that. And so we have this waking up, what I call the sleepers waking the sleepers is what I call one of my speeches, where people who've been kind of sitting in the wings, wondering what they're supposed to do, are suddenly, the universe is giving them some direction. They're actually coming to life. They're actually feeling an intense commitment to something, and waiting for that to either drop in front of them or seeking it out.
Yeah, it is amazing that too. And do you, I know we discussed this before, and I don't know whether you want to talk about it on air or not, and you don't have to, of course, but we were talking about whether your son was aware of the role that he's come into play, and that whether he's conscious of it, and maybe how far he might feel he is from either beginning this next phase or another point of development beginning.
Okay, once again, there's a limit to what I'm willing to say about my son, because I do at the same time feel that there is a measure of protection that must be adhered to. But I can address what I've put in the book. And I'll address it in a general way, in that there's millions of young people who've been born since the late 70s, early 80s onwards, who have these kinds of tasks to do, who are what I call, and what the Greys described to me as, the concealed ones. Now, I describe this in my book as the three waves. And I first began talking about this back in 2007, about the three waves of souls that were incarnating on the planet, and each wave has a different task to do. So this third wave is the one that my son and others like him are in, and they are all people who don't have full or hardly even partial memory of their experiences. They may have little snippets, as he has, of a contact taking place or returning from a contact, but very little else. However, what they do have is this extraordinarily well-developed sixth sense, and by that I mean things like the ability to talk to spirit and see spirit, seeing auras, having healing abilities, having a well-developed psychic capacity, all of that kind of thing, which he has exhibited since birth. And but they don't use this overtly, if I can put it that way. They tend to use it in a very natural, normal sense that people don't necessarily recognize as, oh, that's a real psychic thing, I'm not sure about that. They use it in their everyday work and life as if it's a completely normal, and therefore people accept it as being completely normal. And I think this particular echelon of children now growing into young adulthood are going to rise into positions of what I call power, but I use that word in a very positive and constructive sense, in that with the education that they have acquired as humans, but also the education they've acquired from the greys and other species, they are going to get into positions where they can make enormous changes in the world. And this will occur at a time when maybe we hit rock bottom on the planet, and we're looking like at present we're not too far away from that, or where the need will arise on the planet, a dire need will arise for absolute change right across the board. And we see, prime ministers and presidents discussing climate change and all kinds of other political agendas, etc. So I think we're approaching a time where, as a civilization, this realization will hit us in the face that we absolutely have to change. We have to change now. And I think it is at this time that these young people will be in senior positions and in positions of power and authority, and they will help to bring in those changes and formulate and construct those changes and bring about this much needed change and evolution, not only in our technology and our medicine and our education, but in political systems and social systems as well.
Yeah, indeed. So Suzanne, tell us about some of the material that we're going to be hearing about looking at in your book when we get that. Some of the earlier trials and realization, because you were talking about your son having all those abilities, but also it was part of your background.
Yes, that's right. Right from early childhood, I was able to see and communicate with spirit. That was a natural, normal thing. I was able to describe things to family members that I could see, describe people and what they were saying, and they were able to identify that as relatives who'd passed on, etc. So there was that side of it. I also saw lights around people, which of course as a child I didn't know what that was, but the lights around people, which would occur quite spontaneously, the lights around people and the colours around people told me things about them. It often told me things about their state of well-being, both health or happiness or emotion or whatever. So sometimes I would come out with statements that people found confronting because they thought they'd hidden something. They thought that they weren't showing anything to the world, but I was actually able to pick up on it and comment about it. So it was quite confronting, and I soon learnt that I really should keep my mouth shut on many occasions and actually not say it. So there was this dampening down of this ability, as many experiencers around the world talk about this, and many people working in spiritual fields as well. But I also was able to communicate with animals. From the age of 4, I remember I could communicate with my Cocker Spaniel dog, and but also insects and birds and other kinds of creatures. I would know if they were sick and what was wrong with them or whatever. So there was this whole right across the board kind of thing happening. I sometimes came out with predictions just quite spontaneously, and they would happen. So there was this whole raft of psychic things that my son and many, many other people in the world share.
Yes, it does seem to be part of the kind of template that goes with experiences. And as I say to people myself, I'm not an experiencer, although the empathy is quite highly pronounced, and sometimes the intuitive side. But definitely, what I've seen of some of things around experiences. It's really phenomenal. And this prediction element, or whatever you want to call that, it's very developed in a lot of people, and it's very scary for them also. So have you had any predictions about any world events, or have you got any to come that you can share?
I have, but I tend not to publicize predictions in that way, although I do make references in my book. I think that part of what I have come to understand for my own personal path is that when I experience something like that, it's a message to me. I've realized this at last, that it's not necessarily something you go and broadcast. It's a message to me about how I can then use this knowledge in my work or in my speeches or in articles that I write or whatever. But I will give you an example. About roughly 2 weeks before the 9/11 happened, I woke up in the morning and became extremely tearful and didn't know why, but had seen something in what I thought was a dream that night, and predicted to my husband that something soon was going to happen that was going to change the world. It was going to change the world in that it would change our liberties, it would change our privacy, it would change our movements around the planet for quite some time, and really it would confine people in a great sense, and that this would not be the be-all and end-all, that there would be flow-on effects and continuing effects from this. But the thing that got me the most in the heart was that there was a lot of people would lose their life like that, and in a very tragic way. So got up one morning in New Zealand here, and we turned the news on and saw the photos of the planes crashing into the Twin Towers, and immediately knew that that was it. But the same thing happened just recently before the bombings, the terrorism in France. Had that same premonition that something was about to happen, that it would actually slow the process of the contact field for a while. I was actually given the personal message that there would be just this little holdback for a while, because the spiritual hierarchy of our planet and the ETs working with them, which includes a species of the greys that I've had contact with, wished to ascertain and look at the effect that this was happening, that this would have on humanity, and we can still see now flow-on effects happening from that.
It would, I think it would be interesting to hear some of your some of the teachings that were given to you, I think it was part of the earlier lessons. I may be wrong about the timing of them there, Suzy, with when you were shown the 1945 event, and I'll let you pick that story up, and what else was shown beside that. So we're back in 1945, and you're on board a ship, as I understand it, and the Greys are showing you some information.
Yes, it was actually between 1978 and probably 1980 sometime that this happened. I don't recall the exact date of this particular memory of being on board craft. But the strange thing was that this particular experience was very unlike in any of the other memories I have, and that normally when I am taken on a craft with other humans, the activities that take place are, you know, they're set, if we want to put it that way, by the Greys. So they're quite officious. They like to get things done. They have something that they want to do, it gets done, and then you're taken home. But on this occasion, it was actually the humans who were taking the lead role, if I can put it that way. We were actually in a room divided into groups with a few humans and a few Greys. So I guess you could say it was a bit like what we call buzz groups, where small groups of humans and Greys having discussions, and they were actually interested in our lives, what we do, our families, and how we perceive things as humans. So this discussion was taking place, and I remember expressing an interest in astronomy. And so one of the things I've noticed with the Greys is if you express an interest in something, they have this desire to inform you. this desire to teach you a bit more. So I was asked if I'd like to go to a special room and see something related to that. Naturally, I said I would. So I was taken up a spiral kind of a stairway, and I assumed to the top of quite a large craft, and into a room. Now, when I entered this room, it was spatially confusing, if I can put it that way, because I could see it was a square room, but there seemed to be a circular aspect about it, a spherical aspect about it I couldn't put my finger on, and it was spatially disorienting to look at. So the grey said, well, I asked him about it. He said, don't worry about that. You have to understand this piece of equipment in the middle of the room, and then you will understand that. So he took me over to a console, which was like a very large sloping screen, so a large rectangular sloping screen on a pedestal. And it was completely covered with a grid like graph paper, a very fine grid of beige light. And it showed the Milky Way galaxy, and the Milky Way galaxy viewed side on. But he then proceeded to show me all the different things that this phenomenal piece of technology, which I've called the galaxy screen, could do. So he could touch any part of the grid, and it would bring up a view of that part of the galaxy. And you could go into that part of the galaxy, because when you touched another part of the screen, up would come in the center of the room, and here's the spherical aspect coming into play, what I now know to be a virtual reality view of that grid, of that part of the galaxy. And he could zoom in on a planet, a sun, a moon, or whatever. So it was quite phenomenal, and of course in those days I didn't understand it. To me it was just images hanging in the air that were formed by light. You could put your hand through them and walk through them. I didn't know anything about virtual reality as I understand it now. And on this occasion he said he wanted to show me something, because he sensed a commitment within me, a commitment to a future of talking about my experiences, which at that stage, back in 1978, I certainly wasn't doing. I was still coming to terms as human Suzy, still coming to terms with what was happening. So we have this difference between the human psyche that's coming to terms with it, and the psyche of the human taken on board the craft, where everything is familiar and you know you've been doing it for a long time. And this is something that other experiencers can relate to. So he brought up a virtual reality image of the Earth and said, we're going to go to a specific time period, and I'm going to show you the atomic explosions of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and I want you to watch it. It will be shocking, and prepare yourself for that. So he adjusted the technology, and I was able to see something which back in the late 70s we did not have in our technology, and that was I was able to see the shockwave in virtual reality form that went out from the planet, and it kept going out and out, and as it went out he kept zooming out away from the planet, so the planet got smaller and smaller and smaller, and I was still able to see this shockwave going way, way out. And that was a really defining moment for me to understand the effect of nuclear warfare, and the effect that the whole thought of oneness, if we like to look at that today, which is a more recent terminology, this really illustrated that oneness of what we do on our planet can affect our solar system and beyond. And he said to me, he kind of reached into my brain with his mind to pull out a terminology I would understand and relate to, and he pulled out the term, this will put fire in your belly. And it did, because it made me realize how absolutely shocking that warfare and development of nuclear warfare is, and the horror stories that happened in those bombings, the terrible suffering and tragedy, we don't want that repeated. And but the greater understanding, greater teaching from that was quite simply, what you do affects others on any level, whether it was just me and you, Joanne, or you and someone else, or me and Steve. What you do affects others, And so this whole self-responsibility as a person, as a community, as a country, as a part of our planet comes into play. And I think that underpins so much on our planet that we actually need to understand is the responsibility and the repercussions and the ramifications if we don't take responsibility for the effect of our actions on others.
Yeah, and were you able to see what impact I mean, I appreciate that you saw the reverberations going out from the bombing and the many bombings. I think you said there's actually a short video showing all the bombings. I think I might have seen that at some time over the several years anyway, quite a few years, and it's something like well over 2,000.
Yes, this is over 2,000. That's actually on YouTube and people can visit it. They can go for a time-lapse video of the nuclear explosions on our planet. You'll come up with a video by a young Japanese artist who's made a phenomenal video of how many have occurred on our planet. And every single one of those, even the tests that took place in particular in the Pacific, which is my region, in the South Pacific, and the effects that those will have had long term as well.
So did they tell you what any of the effects were on the solar system? Did they give you any detail about that?
No, but in another experience that I had, which I write about in a book called The Test, they did extrapolate on that, and they gave it both a microcosmic and macrocosm. So the effect that for example, our spacecraft going out into space has, cutting through the energy fields of planets, cutting through the solar system and the natural ebb and flow that is in space. But they also talked about the same thing on our planet. We have energy fields in our planet, we have flows of weather patterns, etc. We have ley lines and areas on the planet where there is obviously energy emerging that has an impact on our well-being. Yeah. And they talked about how that when they travel through our planetary system, through our atmosphere rather, they are very aware of not actually cutting through those systems and that can damage our well-being, our health, and our nervous systems.
I think it's really fascinating, and I also wanted to talk to you about how they work with you mentally, because I was discussing a little bit about what you'd said with Bill Brooks, who's a soldier who'd love to have a chat with you at some point about some of your experiences, because he said, gosh, the way you described how they get inside your mind and how they use that is something that he is extremely familiar with. He hasn't had, I say it's not super positive, it's not incredibly negative, it's just that he's been locked out for so long about what that all meant. He was never harmed or had really much fear. There are other things that gave him more fear than those things, those experiences. But he said that the sort of the mind scanning, and maybe we can put up the information transfer or the info transfer picture that Thomas has done as well. Because that's very much what people talk about. I know Hilary Porter and many other people have spoken about that. So because you explain it very well, I think it would be interesting to hear your experience of how they did that. And also then maybe we can talk about some of the language and the script.
Mm. Okay, well, a lot of experiencers and abductees talk about having an information transfer. Some people call it a knowledge bomb or a download or whatever. I often refer to it as a thought seed. And from what I have experienced, I've kind of been able to separate out these transfers into different kinds of transfers given for different reasons. But basically, they can transfer from their mind a huge amount of information in a split second, or if it's a very vast amount of information, like, for example, the equivalent of a dozen or so encyclopedias, then it may take a bit longer. And people experience that in different ways. Some people talk about seeing lights and colours and images and that flashing through their mind at lightning speed. Others experience nothing. Some people feel a tingling in the forehead as the information is going in. But this is one way that they can equip you with a huge amount of information. Now, in my speeches, I talk about the different kinds of telepathy also that they employ in their communications with humans. And you've been taught to understand this style of telepathy right from childhood. And one of the things which is a variation of the information transfer is what I call sieving, where, for example, if they're communicating with you and they realize that they've lost you, you're not understanding anymore. You understood up to here, and then they've lost you. They will stop and they will throw a whole heap of information with telepathy into your mind about that particular thing that you're a bit confused about. So they'll toss in a whole lot of information into the mind, and anything that you don't need seems to like fall through the sieve. So if you're washing something in a sieve, all the good bits are left there in the water or whatever, the liquid falls out the bottom. And that's a bit the same with this process, where what is left there is what is needed to bring you up to speed so they can carry on, and what is not needed by you, what you don't need to understand, is just gone into the subconscious mind. So there's all these different methods that they use to inform humans, but the key thing is that they're providing you with a massive amount of data in a very short space of time.
Yes, I know, again, talking about Bill, just because I know his story so well, and some of the listeners will be used to hearing me speak about him, but he didn't know anything for 44 years, and then he had a knowledge bomb. And in fact, he called it a download. He said it was like, and when he was first describing it, I'd read quite a bit on near-death experiences at the time, well, over the years, and it was just like a near-death experience, because his whole, at age 44, his whole life was played back, just like the death experience, near-death experience. And this was a guy who didn't believe in this stuff, would think people like you and I were complete fruitcases, and he'll nutcases, and he'll say so today, and he'll laugh about that, because now the shoe is on the other foot. And he was so astonished, and his head was so broken open by that. But the very interesting thing is, he said, I can remember forgetting. He had this knowledge bomb, let's call it. That's a really good description, or this download. And he had that over, he doesn't know if it took milliseconds, many seconds, minutes, or even hours. He just, was there in the midst of it and found himself talking about atoms, about stuff the guy without any education didn't know any about that stuff about that. But then he remembered one major memory. It was like a massive abduction event, and he remembered forgetting the others, if they sort of slid off to the back of his mind. And then over the last 20 years, they've all been coming back into play. And so he's really been wondering about that. And even today in a conversation, or maybe yesterday, he said that he's been getting this sort of sensing and feeling, and maybe even communication about, I think he used the words, it's time to make it right. And I said, oh, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, everything, it's like a personal thing. He said, it's not a global thing. He said, it's about us all making our own stuff right. So, if I've been an idiot or I've upset someone, I need to sort that out, that kind of idea.
Yep, self-responsibility.
It was very interesting, because that poor soul has been, on the tail end of a lot of pretty dreadful stuff. So, human stuff as well. Anyway, but that was, sorry, carry on.
That's all right. I think that's great, because what you're talking about here is what I call a thought seed, and that is something that, well, it may be, I don't know this gentleman, but the other thing that they can do is put a huge amount of information in your mind that doesn't open up for many years until the time is right. And that may be as part of the work that you have to do, or tasks, soul tasks that you have to complete, or whatever. can be part of what I write about as the agenda and the multi-layered programs that are taking place to raise us up, bring us up in terms of evolution and spirituality. And so I'm predicting, and here's a prediction, that over the next few years there's going to be people en masse coming forward saying, I have these memories. I know I have to do this. This is what I have to do. This is what I understand. And there'll be people coming out of the closet in all directions who have knowledge bombs or thought seeds that are opening up and informing them, and they'll suddenly have all this information, and there will need to be people who understand this, who will be able to assist people, because it will be quite daunting for some people. Some people will take to it like a duck out of water, duck in water and understand it, and others will not. So the timing factor that I talk about in my book and in speeches is central to everything, because they can see what lies ahead. They can see where we're going and what needs to be done. And so it's like there's this big chess game going on, setting up the pieces and setting up the board to get it right. And of course, not everyone who has a memory that they need to do something with, not everyone's going to do something with it. So there has to be plan A, B, C, D, E, and lots of people who have these implanted thoughts or implanted tasks or information or knowledge or whatever. And sometimes it's used just simply to wake people up, because as you mentioned, people will come out with information and they'll say, well, where did I get that from? I'm not scientific, or I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm not an expert on this, and yet I have all this information. So then they seek to make sense of it, and that's where their little path starts. They start this searching and seeking, and it takes them somewhere.
I think it's quite interesting too, because one of the things that Bill said, which is very unusual, I think, in terms of awareness from someone of his nature, was that when this knowledge bomb occurred, he instantly knew that there was a big part played by the pharmaceutical industry in a negative way on our planet in terms of control, and also that the government knew all about it, which is very interesting. Very, very interesting indeed.
That's very interesting. I know the Greys have used the phrase many times about humans harming humans. And, you know, there's so many people who say, oh, these aliens, they're bad and they're going to harm us and hurt us. And maybe there are people who have met negative species. I acknowledge that. There's a lot of people who've had very sad and tragic experiences. But on the other hand, when we look at our own civilization, on every level we can see humans harming humans.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that really kind of brings us to where we are in a way right now, with this sort of sense of growing sense of getting those players in place and the board set up. I don't know what anything's going to look like. I don't know whether do you know what your mission is? And do you have any fear at all of any of these folks, these other off-worlders or even on-worlders?
Well, so far, I don't have fear of the off-worlders that I have had experience with, but then I have not met all of them that are visiting us. I'm only talking about the species that I have had contact with. But the Greys explained to me this timeline kind of picture as being like a train journey. And that was when they reached into my mind, pulled out an analogy that I can understand, a train journey. So they said the train starts somewhere, so it has a starting point and it has a destination, and you know you're going to get to the destination eventually. But in between, there'll be lots of stations the train will stop at. It may be held up because of people who get on and off. There may be incidents that happen because of those who are on the train and those who are getting on and off. There may be a breakdown of the train, etc. So you can't necessarily judge when the train will get there. It may be late. It may be early, or it may be on time, and it will depend on every stage in between and what happens. And so I go back to where I said recently I was told that they were watching what was going to happen after the incident in France, the terrorism incident. They were watching. And so here we've got like that hold up in the train journey, that where there's an assessment taking place.
Yeah.
Um,
So tell us something of the different species that you've met, because I know that you've met actually quite a few different kinds of greys. I don't think we've got a picture of the different kinds of greys, but what I'll perhaps show, perhaps if we could put the kids' illustration up, we'll just see some of them around you, and we can actually talk about that picture once I know it's up there. But just tell us about some of the, because I know you've not only the greys, but also some conehead greys, which is very interesting, bearing in mind we have coneheads on the planet, conehead skulls, that is. And
right.
yeah, and also some, I think I'm right in thinking that you had exposure to some other insectoid kind of beings. Is that correct?
Yes, well, most of my contact has been with the greys, and within that there's mixed species. So there's greys that are mixed with something else, and you can tell them apart from the standard greys that you see on board craft, and it may be a skin variation or an eye variation, the colour, the shape, etc., the change of shape of the head. You can see that there's a mixture of species there. One of the facets of the greys that I have seen is, as you said, those with cone-shaped head, and I have found most of them have been in a position of authority. But also I've seen what I refer to as the ancient greys. I refer to it as the rootstock of the greys, and these ones are very, very lined, very, very lined faces, big folds of skin all down the body and the neck, and they tend to be quite small. The coneheads seem to be much taller. I've seen these short greys and the tall greys on craft. Many people say that the short greys are clones or clone-like, and that may be the case. Perhaps some species of greys have clones that work on the craft in the same way that we're developing robots, etc. But all the short greys that I have had contact with have had their own personal psyche and individuality. They're not clone-like in any way, and some of them have been in positions of authority, if I can put it that way, which kind of negates many people's comments that it's always the tall greys that are in charge. In fact, in the playroom as a child, I recall most of the carers in the playroom being tall greys, and some of them
Right.
with cone-shaped heads, not so much the short greys. So that's also an interesting point. But I've also seen and have communicated with mantis entities on the craft working with the greys, and human-like entities. I don't know whether I never did find out whether they were future humans, whether they were, time travelers or whatever, but they were very tall, very thin, and very slim and angular, and communicated telepathically, and they were in control of craft, etc. So they were a species, if I can put it that way, that were very humanoid in appearance and in their behaviour. So I have never seen a reptilian. I've never had anything to do with reptilians, but I have seen mixtures of greys who have very distinctly reptilian looking eyes, but never seen the kind of entities that some people describe that are scaled, etc., and very reptilian. I haven't come across them. Yeah. And I also have some brief memories of blue entities that look very human-like and have very, very pale blue skin.
The greys that you saw, all the different species that you have seen, I heard somebody say that there were approximately 80 different species of grey. Of course, I have no idea if that's the case or not, but were they all of a similar hue, look, i.e. sort of grey, or because some people have described them as white and even tan and browns, and did you see a mixture of colorations or not really?
Yes, I have, and when I was 12 years old, I was taken into their quarters. I expressed an interest in what they eat, and I was actually taken away, asked if I wanted to see their version of a kitchen, if I can put it that way. It wasn't really like any kitchen we might know, but I was taken and shown a product they were making that they could absorb. They could also ingest it by just putting it into the slit of the mouth and absorbing from it. They didn't swallow it, that I was aware of. And a perfect example then was seeing quite a number of greys in that room who had different skin colorings, almost like charcoaly, dark brown, mottled skin, pinky white, ivory coloured, so a whole range of colour from grey through to the very, very white looking. And that's been difficult for my husband to express artistically. Many of his drawings, he just has the form of the grey and some shading, because they all vary just the same as our skin colour, and blotches and blemishes may distinguish us, they also distinguish them.
Well, what's been his feeling or opinion about what his wife's been going through?
Well, there's a story behind that of how we met, actually, which is very interesting, and one would think it was by design, by the way it happened, so I'll just talk about that briefly first. I was on my own with my two children for several years, and I was sitting on my bed one day, and it was like the thought dropped into my head, change your name, and I thought, well, where did that come from? Why would I change my name? And I sat there and I thought about it, and I thought, yes, I wouldn't change it to my maiden name, and I don't want to keep my former married name, so what would I change it to? And bang, Hansen came out. Now, Hansen, as it happens, is my grandfather's birth biological name. His father died when he was a very young child, and his mother remarried, and as they did in those days, the children were adopted by the stepfather and given his family name. So his name changed from Hansen to Pooley, and I thought, oh yeah, Hansen sounds quite good. So within 6 weeks I'd discussed it with my boys, and I'd officially, by law, changed my surname to Hansen, and it felt really right. It felt as if I belonged with that name. So once my name was changed, my rural letterbox had to have Hansen written on it so that the new mail with my new name could come to me. And I received some mail for a T. Hansen, and I didn't know who this was, so I asked around the neighbours, and they said, oh, there's a man building a house down the bottom of the road, it might be his mail. So I went down and said, is this your mail? And he said, yes, I'm Thomas Hansen. And so we introduced to each other, and he said, would you mind delivering my mail, because I haven't got letterbox up, still building the house. If you get any more, can you drop it in? And looking at him, I felt like I knew him. I felt as if I recognized him, as if I knew him already. And so eventually we got to know each other, and to cut a long story short, we married. And I actually have memory of a very tall, thin man who has been on the craft with me on occasions, with this tremendous sense of humour, who was a great artist. And of course, I sincerely believe that that's him. And so that's how we met. And from the moment that we met, he's been an absolute supporter and stalwart. He is an artist, and I've spent many hours sitting next to him saying, well, this is what it looked like, this is how it was, because I'm no artist and he is, and he has been able to characterize things for me and capture facial expressions and elements of what I have seen and recall. He's been able to capture very well, and it's just been absolutely marvelous to be able to put those multiplicity of images up during a speech and actually show people, not just verbally, but for them to actually be able to see what you're talking about.
It does make a difference. I don't know if we've got it up at the moment, but I was putting up the images which you've called kids. Again, it reminded me of Bill, because he was taken on board a craft. Well, he was invited on board a craft when he was 10, and by two tall blondes and what he assumed to be their children. And he was just asked if he wanted to go on the craft, and he was a 10-year-old boy from a very poor area. He had no idea this was unusual. I thought it was a bit different, but not, not out of the ordinary, let's say. and he ended up with the two children with spheres, small beach balls, and they were using their mind to play. And they suggested he try it too, and he did. But he could, and he says, but now I believe they did it because I can't do it now. And it reminded me of your picture. Now I believe that you also have had some similar experience.
Yes, and I can identify with his thought that it must have been them doing it because he can't do it now. But this is what I mentioned before. When you go on a craft, you're in a very, very different zone, if I can put it that way. And sometimes when I've been taken on and say there's been a lecture taking place, I've been talking to a group of humans, they will say, okay, raise your consciousness, raise your energy. And you've been taught to do this from childhood, to raise it up. But also, I find, and I just recently wrote about this in an article, that the light, there is something to do with the light that you are sometimes exposed to on a craft, which can be quite bright and intense. And it seems to somehow or other enhance your awareness and your ability to psychically and consciously elevate your awareness and your abilities. And as to whether that opens up parts of your brain and allows you to use those abilities you've been taught. Because as I said, I can recall being in a playroom where we were able to create holograms in the air with our mind. So we were able to create these images of light, crystalline, like tunnels and all kinds of things, as children would use blocks on our planet, make things with building blocks at preschool, etc. We were able to do that in the air and alter them. So someone would add to it, and you'd add to it and add to it, and you'd have things going through it, etc. And I know that I was contributing to that. I was actually doing it, but those are things I can't do here. So there's something about the environment on a craft and the fact that you're with people who can do these things, and you're in an environment that is conducive to you using these, what I believe to be latent abilities that we all have, but we have forgotten how to use over thousands and thousands of years.
Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating. Tell us something about you. You were describing something, a piece of equipment that was like a tablet. And we'll come back to the picture of the kids in a moment, because I'm not sure if that's still up or not, because I just wanted to explain that a bit. But just tell us about that, because that's really interesting. And you were also looking at the script, and that's what I found also fascinating.
Yes. Back in the 70s and 80s, I was actually shown advanced versions, basically, of technology that has come out in our civilization in the last 10 years or so. So on one occasion, I was part of a group of 16 humans who were taken on board craft to perform a test. And by a test, I mean we were each given a task or a problem to solve, but it wasn't actually the result of, or the answer of the problem that was the important thing. The test was simply a vehicle or a means by which we could display to the greys present how well we understood what we'd been taught over a certain period of time. So we'd obviously had some very intense teaching about how to use certain technology and how to use the mind or consciousness associated with their organic technology. And that link is very important, because that's just something we're still in the early stages of developing ourselves on this planet. So we were each given what I referred to back then as an information tablet, and immediately that should ring a recognition bell with many people with the small tablets that we now use today. And it was like a very thin piece of plastic. So your old-fashioned X-ray screens, X-ray sheets rather, which were like grey thin plastic. It was thinner than that, but flexible like that, so you could roll it up if you wanted to. It was very flexible. No sign of an energy source, it just worked. And seemingly to me, embedded in the plastic were images, what we might now know as computer icons. Now, this was back in 1993, I think, And I never used a computer until about 1998, 99. So I was completely oblivious of computers and what they could do. And yet in 1993, I was able to describe, I had very, very intense and extensive memory of this particular incident. And there's so much information involved in it that it took 2 chapters in the book to write it. And even then I had to leave a lot of it out because you can't fit it all into a book. So we were given these tablets which were pushed into the console of a larger computer console which we each had, and then we had to solve the problem that each of us was given, and each was given a different problem but of similar complexity, and we used our skills to solve the problem. One of the skills we used, as you said, was being able to read a box of script. Now, a lot of people can write, experiencers, abductees, they write script and they can read it. But the script that people write and read, to me, often has, not always, but often has the look of aspects of our hieroglyphics, aspects of various alphabets or written languages. But these were quite different in that you would be shown just a group of symbols placed in a specific way. And in the same way that on a computer we will click on an icon on our screen, that will take us to a website. Then we click on something on a website, it will take us to a page in a website. So in effect, we're going deeper and deeper into information. Well, with this computer, you did all of that with your mind. So you looked at the symbol and you somehow connected with the consciousness of the central computer system on the craft. And your mind, if I can put it that way, would just spiral into it. And all of the information that was hidden behind that icon, if I can put it that way, was available to you. It was all there in your mind. It was you read it with your mind. You did not have to read the script as such. You accessed consciousness and data and information through the script symbol. And I have referred to this as depth reading the script, because there's this depth to it that you access, but you have to access it with this, not necessarily with these. You could shut your eyes and you could still go into that symbol. So the test also involved, we could produce a hologram of something else that had been put into our mind, because the test started by being given a very large information transfer. So we utilized that. We could bring a sheet of that out in a hologram form and read it while also accessing something on the screen. So there were about 4 or 5 different forms of data that we were accessing simultaneously. Now, who could do that in their day-to-day lives on the planet, let alone describe technology which we are now developing ourselves? And this was back in 1993. And in New Zealand at that time, nobody had computers. They only discussed the public being able to have computers and some institutes in New Zealand in 1995, which was 2 years after I had this experience and these memories of the details.
Yeah, that really is kind of extraordinary. I want to talk to you a bit more about another experience, but first, just to go back to your wonderful picture, or Thomas's wonderful picture of the kids, and it's, I imagine it might be, I'm just bringing it up on the screen, it's a pregnant lady, maybe it's yourself, with the blue ball, and we've got a whole host of some even blue-eyed greys there. And so just describe that as we've got the pictures, we're looking at that, because that's really fascinating.
Yes, I get a lot of reactions when that one goes up on screen in a speech, actually, and it's even when people have looked at the image itself, you'll have people say such very ordinary things like, oh, I like that one, oh, I like that one's eyes, I like the look of that one, and can be quite amusing, the reactions to this picture. That is actually me when I was pregnant with my first son, and I was getting close to actually having him, which is an interesting thing about if we look at the question of when a soul enters a body, for those of us who believe a soul enters a body and brings its consciousness with it. I was taken on board the craft I'd been quite ill. I'd had toxemia and high blood pressure in that pregnancy, and they were quite concerned about me. The human doctors, you know, my doctor was telling me the placenta could be failing, and I was taken on board craft, and the first thing they did was the senior grey present put his hand over my forehead and calmed me, because I was quite upset because I was really feeling unwell. It was pretty huge, and you know, things weren't looking good. So he calmed me down first of all and said, okay, we're going to remind you of something first. So I was reminded of all the visits on the craft from childhood, playing with the blue ball of light that was going to be my son. And at that stage, I did not know, back in those days in New Zealand, whether my child was going to be a boy or a girl. We didn't have that kind of access to that technology here. And so I was just having a child. And he calmed me right down and said, okay, we're going to perform a merging procedure. And that is, we're going to bring in the blue ball of light, the soul, and we're going to allow it to enter the body, your body, and the baby you're carrying. And in order to do this, he said he would have to dampen down or slow down my metabolism. So just as a yogi can bring down their blood pressure and slow their breathing rate, slow their heart rate until you'd almost think the person was asleep or in some kind of comatose state, he did that. And I recalled feeling very cold. I couldn't string any words together. I couldn't think straight. I felt like I'd been put into suspended animation. Then in came a whole pile of little grey children, and in came the greys with the blue ball of light. And while I was in that state, the ball just floated just very serenely and disappeared inside me. And as that happened, I felt as if my entire body was full of light. And then he slowly brought my metabolism back up to normal. And that feeling of being filled with light did not go away. It was many hours. I'd already been returned home and woken up in the morning feeling still that light, having the memory of what had happened and feeling that light. And it was not until I registered that the next morning that I felt that light just begin to dim and my self come back to normal again. So I was told that all of those little children were going to be what I might refer to as his watchers during life. They were children who would be a little older than him, but grey children and mixed species who would associate with him. So when he was brought on craft as a child and right onwards throughout his life, he would be associating with those particular entities in the same way that I had quite commonly known entities that I often saw on craft from childhood right through to adulthood. I associated with those same entities. It's like saying they were in charge of me or my part of the program. So there was a great deal of thought going on. I describe in the book how the air was just full of crisscrossing thoughts and excited telepathic chatter going on, and he asked them before the process took place to be quiet, to still it. And so there was this complete telepathic silence. And then once the process was over, they started again, and then eventually they were taken out of the room. So it was quite overwhelming, a very overwhelming experience, and a great feeling of love for this blue ball of light as it came and joined my being and the child that I was carrying.
That's absolutely beautiful. That really is lovely, and kind of a very serene experience by the sound of it. And again, I'm just looking at another of the drawings that you sent across, because there's so much to say in every single one. And the light elevator, I think, would be really nice to have a look at, because what's really great about that is that you've actually had some corroboration, as I understand it, from another experiencer nowhere near your geographical location who described it.
Well, I had, in the situation that I described before, when I was taken on board with 16 humans to perform a test, when the test was over, 4 of us had passed it, in the sense that we'd exhibited the kind of knowledge that they'd been teaching us, that we could utilize it in the right way. So 4 passed, and there were 3 males and me. And I was asked if I would like to take the information tablets down a level in the craft to deliver them and then come back and join the group who we were about to be taken home. And it was quite natural to walk along the corridor and step into what I describe as a light elevator. So along the end of the corridor was a tube-like structure that was clear, so it looked like glass or perspex or something like that, very clear. And it went through the floor and through the ceiling and connected through different levels of the craft. And it was filled with bright, sparkling, whitish blue light, so flashing electric blue, pale, dark, flashing with the white. And you could see it sort of streaming up and down simultaneously like this. It was very beautiful and quite awe-inspiring. And a door would slide back and you would step into it. Now, when I was a child, I was scared to step into it for a while because there's no floor. When you step into it, you are suspended in light, and it has this very soft feeling on the skin. You expect it to be like electric, but it wasn't at all. It was very soft and very almost comforting, really. You would be suspended in it, and you would think the symbol of the floor you're going to, and there'd be a moment of blackness, and then you'd be there. The door would slide open, you'd step out into another area of the craft. And so that's what happened on this occasion. And it seemed unusual to me, this memory. It was very distinct and clear, but I'd never heard anybody talk about anything like this. So I sort of kept that to myself for a while. And it wasn't until I was preparing for a speech over in Australia that I thought, well, corroborative evidence is a great thing, and that's another part of this test procedure that I haven't talked about, the acquisition of this word corroboration. And I decided to search the internet and see if there were any other websites with experiencers or abductees artwork who may have seen something similar. And I typed in light elevator, nothing came up. It was all to do with, human elevators. I typed in liquid light because that's what it always felt like to me, and up came an image, a drawing that was virtually identical. So I contacted the person through the website who'd done this image, and said to him, look, is this actually a drawing of an experience you've had, or is this your imagination? What can you tell me about it? Because I've seen something similar, but it was on a craft. And this person wrote back to me and said yes, told me when this experience happened, that he was an experiencer, and was able to describe the light elevator identically, even down to the control mechanism that is often on the wall beside it, what it looked like with script oscillating on it, and coloured red lights. So he was someone who could describe use the same words. It was like velvet on the skin, someone who could describe it identically. So I gained their permission to use their drawing in my speech. So I went over to Australia, and as part of the tour that I was doing, I also spoke to an abductee experiencer support group. And afterwards, a young teenager came up to me with her mum and said, do you want to have a look at my folder of drawings? And I said, oh yes, these are my experiences, she said. And bang, there's another similar drawing. And I said to her, well, what can you tell me about this? This looks interesting. Same thing. She said, well, I call this a teleporter because when you step into it, it takes you somewhere else. And there's no floor. You just are suspended in this light, and it's very soft on the skin. So I now had two people, one in Australia, one in the US, both experiencers, who were able to describe the same thing as me. So if that's not corroborative evidence that needs to be looked at by science, what is? And when Dr. Rudy Schild looked at this particular, when I was writing the manuscript, he said that's, probably an anti-gravity piece of apparatus, and that you lose that momentary feeling of cognition. Everything goes black for a split second, and you're there.
And did you know where you were going? I mean, when you got into the elevator, were you thinking floor down, floor up, or how did you know where to go?
Well, the grey who gave me the tablets to take to the floor gave me the symbol telepathically. Here's the symbol. Go in there, you think the symbol, and there you are. The door opens and you're on the next floor. But I have often wondered, I have travelled with other greys going to the same place as me from childhood. I've travelled in very large light elevators that were what we might call a service elevator. They were huge, so they could carry a lot of equipment or apparatus or technology on them. Big rectangular ones, the ones that you go in as an individual or small group was smaller and round. But I've often wondered, and I don't have an answer to this, while you're going up, is someone else coming down? We don't normally do that in our own elevators. We're either going up or people are coming down. But the thought has often crossed that there's some kind of crossover. So when we go into it and we have this moment of blackness, are we actually dematerialized and put back together? I don't know. That's maybe something we'll find out in the future.
Yeah, I've got just a question from Davy up there in Lossiemouth, which is Scotland. And it said, can you ask if she thinks that we can alter our interrelationship with other people using our thoughts directed toward them? Thank you.
I think we can, but that is something that would have to be handled with great responsibility, wouldn't it? Because I can see some quite tragic consequences if that kind of ability is used in a very negative sense. I think that our thought can affect matter, and therefore we have to be very careful with our thoughts. And the other side of my being that I haven't talked about too much, I've talked about being psychic, etc., but I have worked in the areas of mediumship. I don't take money or anything like that. I've never done anything like that, but I have done work, put it that way, with small groups of people. And one of those things that I have done is healing, working with healing, and I have actually psychically seen the effect of negative thoughts directed at people. So I think we have to be very careful with that.
Yeah. We're just going to bring up perhaps the last picture that we've got to look at, and I'm just going to bring up that is the light. It's the light beam, just so we can have that to hand before we talk about the other things. There's so much to talk to you about, but if we have a look at the image of the light beam, that's really interesting because again it looks like you are there's two children standing in a beam, and it looks like it's just over a hole.
That's me with a short grey.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, that's an image of me as a child, and there's actually more to that image. There's a little story that goes with it, and that is the level of encouragement and the level of education that you experience on craft right from childhood in their endeavours to help you become better informed. And often encouraged to practice things and receive encouragement for having done that. And on this occasion, I was being taken home, and I watched other children being taken off the craft, and each was accompanied by a grey. They were not just kind of like dropped down and left to fend for themselves. We were actually escorted down, taken to the bed, etc., and you know, probably put into a happy sleep state. So off we went to sleep. And on this occasion, I felt the grey telepathically envelop me with his arm. It's not actually in that drawing, but when I talk about it in a speech, I talk how I felt as if he had physically put his arm around me, but he hadn't. He had enveloped me with his thoughts that gave the effect of an arm being put around me to reassure me and support and companionship. And because I'd been taught to express a physical movement with a telepathic sense, I did a little practice, and so it was a bit cheeky, I suppose, but I did it back to him, and I telepathically conveyed my arm going around him. And he said to me telepathically, "That's good, that's very good, well done." So that was just a little special compassionate moment that I distinctly recall. of interaction as a child with the grey.
Yes, it's interesting because compassion isn't always, or sometimes even often, a word used with these folks. So that's really nice.
That's right. I think that a lot more people are coming to terms with what they have experienced. I work with people here in New Zealand, and I've had a lot of people who've had frightening experiences, but are now coming to a point of re-examining them and wanting to go deeper into them and understand exactly what was happening, and realizing that there were moments of compassion in amongst that, which if they had registered that at the time, their reaction to a situation may have been very different. That's not always the case, of course, and again, I acknowledge there's people who've had traumatic experiences, but there are those also who are recognizing that a lot of the fear was theirs. It was not fear being caused by the situation or even projected onto them. It was that they were sensing things that were unusual and fearful to what we would understand in our normal day-to-day life.
Have they ever given you any information about these? I'm just going to call them regressive ETs or regressives who are clearly not compassionate, whatever the species. So I just wondered,
Yes.
if they've told you about those and what it means for us that they're engaging in sometimes very cruel acts against humans.
That's right. I have had several phrases said to me over the years, and one of them is that one grey said to me, there are others who are our own in the sense that they look like greys, they are other grey species, but who do not act as we do, and they are not associated with the spiritual hierarchy of the planet as we are. So in my book, in chapter 9, I talk about soul origin and my memories, if I can put it that way, of being a soul and how I came into this life. And one of the things I talk about is being interviewed, if I can put it that way, by the spiritual hierarchy, the universal governing body of this planet, what many people refer to as a council or whatever you want to call it. We have this overarching, overseeing, spiritual, wise body, and the greys, the species that I have worked with, are associated with them. There's a number of species of ETs that are assisting with the programs to upgrade the planet. And of course, then there are going to be species of ETs that fall outside of that, who are not associated with that, and who may have totally different agendas and totally different behaviors towards humans.
Indeed, that's really interesting. Well, we're coming up to the end of our time now. I was really hoping we'd have another big wad of time because I want to ask you so much more, but maybe we can finish off, or we're coming to the end anyway, by the you were given some time to work or have a go at driving a craft telepathically. And the reason I picked on that experience was because also, and maybe just to preempt that, we can talk about your 2000 creation of the UFocus, the New Zealand research body that you've headed up and founded and directed and put together, because I was very interested to see that. I think it was, I don't know, it was a couple of years ago now, I can't remember the time, when you also have an agreement now in place to work with the Chilean UFO group. But what's very interesting about them is that they are mainly all military of one kind or another. So maybe you can just tell us that, and then we can finish off with that amazing story, and there's loads more to say. But
okay. Well, I started investigating UFO sightings at the age of 20 after that experience with the large ball of light. I went on in the 80s. I worked with one of New Zealand's veteran UFO researchers, because there were a number of very active UFO researchers here at that time. And in the year 2000, I felt I'd like to set up my own nationwide group. We didn't have a nationwide group. We just had independent researchers who were working sometimes in cooperation, sometimes independently. So I set up a nationwide network. We have a website, which is www.ufocusnz.org.nz. And I was very fortunate to have two retired air traffic controllers. One was not retired at the time that he joined me, And when he joined, that news went worldwide that an active and working senior air traffic controller was now working with a civilian UFO group. He was also a pilot, and I've had a policeman and various other people who've worked with me over the years. We've got a group of 6 of us at the moment, and we have investigators nationwide who feed us the sighting reports, etc., and we investigate them and document them. Yes, because we have this aviation leaning, and we've interviewed quite a number of New Zealand pilots and retired pilots who've had UFO sightings, we were approached by CFAA in Chile to sign an agreement of cooperation with them. So we share our pilot reports with them, aviation reports, and vice versa. They're actually an aviation, civilian, and Air Force, or military if you like to say, combined group. And so there's very few groups in the world who are like that, of that caliber. And they are assisting in setting up similar groups throughout South America with this focus on aviation reports. But we also have the joint focus that we share with them of focusing on UFO sighting reports that occur around about the time of seismic and volcanic activity, because like Chile, we are a seismic and volcanic country, and we have these phenomenal sightings that happen prior to, during, and after some of those large events. Yes, I had the opportunity to fly a scout craft using a manual mode within our atmosphere, and also flying it through, connecting to the consciousness of the craft, and that was quite a phenomenal experience that I describe in one of the chapters in my book.
Okay, well, that's wonderful. Well, I just want to mention your co-author again, and maybe we can see his info up on the screen there, Dr. Rudy Shield. And I just think that it is fantastic, Suzanne, that you have had an opportunity to work with such a gentleman, such a person of that orientation, because whatever anybody thinks about that or the validity of it, it does help. It really does add a shoulder to the wheel of, kudos is a horrible word, but you know what I mean. And I think that is absolutely fantastic. So Dr. Rudy Shield is also, again, head above the parapet, and he is working with Free and Ray Hernandez and Ralph Steiner and all of those folks, which I think is really exciting, and I'm sure we'll be hearing a lot more of him and perhaps your work as well. So just give us a shout out to your website, Suzanne, please.
Okay, well, Dr. Shield is also a scientific advisor for our website, which is www.communicatorlink.com. So we welcome reports and accounts from people who've had experience with non-human off-planet intelligences, and we examine those. It's totally confidential, and we'll assist people in any way we can.
All right, that's absolutely lovely. And just finally, I just am going to quickly go back to your, I just want to get back to your, where did I put it? It's typical, isn't it? Just as I come off it, I wanted to read it again. I'm just going to go to the back page is what I'm trying to do of your book. And I just wanted to have a quick look at that for everybody before we finally come off. Oh, typical, I've lost it. Okay, well, Suzanne, maybe you can just tell us, encapsulate what the back page of your book says, because that just encapsulates everything.
Oh, okay. Well, it really tells the story, outlines the story, the book outlines the story of my my journey through these experiences, but also I outline the 3 waves of humans incarnating on the planet, which I talked about first in 2007, and the dual soul connection, the dual soul status, which is not something you can explain in 5 minutes, Joanne, but if anyone wants to read about it, they can read my book and see just what this dual soul is, and it is very different from just people who feel like they might be an incarnated ET or whatever. It's very different to that, and as far as I'm aware, I am the only person who's presenting the depth of material on this dual soul status that some experiencers have, and why they have it, and where it all leads, and how it fits into this multi-layered program that's happening on our planet that hopefully will lead us to a greater understanding of ourselves, our place in the universe, and prepare us for open contact with other species in our neighborhood in the galaxy.
That's really interesting. Well, as I said, we've run out of time, and I really wanted to get that under our belt and talk about several other things. But it's been really interesting. I, for one, have really enjoyed it. And just one final question from me, and that is, do you have, I know time is a horrible thing for us to deal with and the ETs, but do you have any kind of concept of a line here, a timeline of when things may move forward? Or is that just not given or not indicated in any way?
Well, it's that whole train journey thing I talked about before.
I know.
Yeah. Everything is dependent on our actions at this point in time on the planet. Everything is dependent on the changes that we make and our actions. And you know, I personally, Joanne, think we're sitting on a real knife edge, and we could fall one way or the other. And I do believe that we have some very difficult times ahead. I think we're only in the beginning of the difficult times, and that may also include earth changes and severe weather, which will impact on us. But spiritually and technologically, we need to advance those two things together, not one behind the other, with the technology taking the lead and using technology in negative ways. That has to change.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Suzanne Hansen, all the way over there in New Zealand, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I know we've got loads more questions, but we just don't have time for them. But another day. So thank you very much. And thank you, Stephen, and everybody who's been listening. I know you've had more questions, and I'm sorry we couldn't get through them, but another time, as I say. So thank you to People's Internet Radio once again for providing a platform for the AMMACH Files. And it is the 15th. Actually, it's not. It's the 16th. I've done it again, of December. So thank you very much, everybody, and have a great evening for those of you having that. And for me, I'm off to my bed soon. Take care, everyone. Good night and good afternoon.